Long before the music had a name, young singers in American cities were discovering what could be built from nothing more than breath, timing, and a few well-matched voices. They did not need a grand theater or a professional rehearsal room. Friends could gather in a stairwell, beneath a railway arch, outside an apartment building, or in a school corridor. Places with hard walls gave the voices a natural echo, making a small group sound larger than it really was. One person usually carried the main tune. Another voice floated above it. A baritone added warmth in the middle, and a deep bass voice created the foundation. Together, they could suggest the sound of a complete band, even when no instruments were present. This style would later become known as doo-wop, but its story began much earlier. Its deepest roots lay in African American musical traditions. Spirituals, work songs, church music, blues, and gospel all contributed important ideas. One of the most important was call and response. A leader would sing or speak a phrase, and the people around him would answer. In church, a preacher might call out a line, and the congregation would reply. In gospel groups, the lead singer could stretch a word, change the melody, or add emotion, while the remaining singers held the harmony steady. The lead was the center of attention, but the group gave the performance its shape. This relationship between one voice and several supporting voices later became a defining feature of doo-wop. Gospel quartets also showed that the human voice could take the place of instruments. A low singer could imitate a bass line. Other members could provide short rhythmic sounds, long sustained notes, or quick replies. The Golden Gate Quartet was among the groups that demonstrated how exciting close harmony could be when it was combined with precise timing and energetic delivery. Popular entertainment offered other influences. The Mills Brothers became famous for making their voices resemble trumpets, guitars, and other instruments. Listeners sometimes found it difficult to tell where the singing ended and the imitation of instruments began. The Ink Spots followed a gentler path. Their recordings often featured a high lead voice, soft background harmony, and a distinctive low-spoken or sung passage. They were not described as a doo-wop group, but many younger singers listened closely to their records and learned from their style. The Ink Spots proved that a small vocal group could sound intimate, romantic, and emotionally direct while still reaching a large audience. During the 1940s, African American communities in northern and western cities continued to grow. Families moved from the South in search of work, greater freedom, and better opportunities. Their children grew up in places such as New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, Chicago, Detroit, and Los Angeles. These young people heard many kinds of music at once. Gospel filled churches. Jazz and blues came through the radio. Popular harmony groups appeared on records, while rhythm and blues brought a stronger beat into clubs and dance halls. From this mixture of influences, new neighborhood groups began to form. The singers learned by listening, copying, and experimenting. One person might suggest a melody, while the others searched for notes that fitted around it. A bass singer could repeat sounds such as boom, doom, or dip. Higher voices might add phrases like shoebop, oa, or shanana. These syllables were not simply meaningless noise. They created movement, filled empty spaces, and helped the voices behave like instruments. They also gave each group a recognizable personality. By the late 1940s, vocal harmony was becoming an important part of rhythm and blues. The Ravens were one of the early groups to stand out. Their deep-voiced singer Jimmy Ricks often took the lead, which was unusual at a time when bass singers normally remained in the background. His powerful delivery showed that a low voice could carry an entire song. The Orioles offered something very different. Led by Sonny Till, they became known for tenderness, uncertainty, and heartbreak. Their 1948 recording, It's Too Soon to Know, helped establish a more vulnerable kind of rhythm and blues performance. The lead singer no longer had to sound fearless. He could sound worried, lonely, or unsure of love. The background singers might comfort him, agree with him, or echo his feelings. This became one of the great strengths of doo-wop. The lead told the story, but the group made the listener feel the emotion surrounding it. Other early groups helped expand the sound. The Five Keys developed smooth arrangements. The Clovers brought a stronger rhythm and blues beat. Billy Ward and the Dominoes mixed careful vocal organization with the emotional intensity of gospel. One of the Dominoes' most important singers was Clyde McPhatter. His high, expressive voice could sound controlled one moment and urgent the next. He later became the first lead singer of the Drifters and eventually built a successful solo career. At the time, these performers were not usually called doo-wop singers. Their records were sold as rhythm and blues or vocal group music. The label doo-wop became common only later, when collectors and radio presenters needed a convenient name for the style. The music existed before the name. By the beginning of the 1950s, the essential ingredients were already in place. A lead voice supporting harmony, a strong bass part, call and response, simple accompaniment, and songs about love, hope, regret, and teenage life. The next step was to carry that neighborhood sound beyond the street corner and into record shops, jukeboxes, and radios across America. The growth of doo-wop depended heavily on small independent record companies. Major labels often showed little interest in African-American rhythm and blues performers. Smaller companies saw an audience that the larger firms were overlooking. Labels such as Atlantic, King, Chess, Specialty, Savoy, Jubilee, VJ, Herald, G, and Rama began recording vocal groups. Some were well organized. Others operated with limited money, small studios, and very little equipment. A group might be discovered at a talent contest, in a club, or through a friend of a producer. The singers could enter a studio, record several takes, and leave without knowing whether the record would ever be released. If a local disc jockey liked the song, everything could change. Radio play might create demand in one neighborhood, then in another city. Record shops would order more copies, and a song made quickly by unknown teenagers could become a regional hit. This system opened doors, but it also created serious risks. Many performers were very young and understood little about contracts, royalties, or publishing rights. Some accepted a small payment instead of a share of future sales. Others signed away ownership of songs they had helped write. A record could sell hundreds of thousands of copies while the singers received almost nothing. Managers and record companies sometimes controlled a group's name. Members could be replaced while the name continued. Years later, several different acts might appear on stage claiming some connection to the same famous group. The music became valuable, but the people who created it were not always treated fairly. Radio was equally important to the rise of the style. Teenagers listened late at night, searching the dial for music that sounded different from the records preferred by their parents. Vocal group songs spoke directly about first love, jealousy, waiting for a telephone call, school dances, and the fear of being left behind. The lyrics were often simple because the emotions were immediate. One of the best-known radio figures was Alan Freed. He promoted rhythm and blues to a broader teenage audience and helped popularize the expression rock and roll. His programs and live shows introduced many white listeners to black performers whose records had previously received little attention from mainstream stations. Freed did not invent the music, but he helped it travel. The teenage market was becoming a major force. Young people bought inexpensive 45 revolutions per minute singles, fed coins into jukeboxes, and requested favorite songs on local radio. A record did not always need a large advertising campaign. It needed a memorable opening, a strong emotional hook, and enough young listeners to tell their friends. Doo-wop was perfectly suited to this new world. 2 recordings released in 1954 became especially important. The first was Earth Angel by the Penguins. The Penguins came from Los Angeles. Their recording sounded simple, sincere, and almost fragile. The lead singer expressed devotion, while the group supported him with gentle harmony. There was no need for a complicated arrangement. The emotional power came from the voices themselves. Earth Angel became a major rhythm and blues success and crossed into the wider popular market. It proved that a young black vocal group could attract listeners throughout the country. As often happened during this period, a white pop group later recorded a cover version. Major labels sometimes believed that white audiences would be more likely to buy a familiar song if it was performed by white singers and presented in a smoother style. These cover versions often received stronger promotion and wider radio exposure than the originals. Even so, the Penguins' version of Earth Angel remained the recording most closely associated with the song. The second landmark record was S.H. Boom by the Chords. Where Earth Angel was tender, S.H. Boom was lively and playful. Its strange but memorable vocal sounds became part of the hook. The record demonstrated that a phrase did not need a clear literal meaning to become unforgettable. The sound of the words could create excitement by itself. A polished cover by the Crew Cuts became a major pop hit, but the Chord original captured rhythm and blues moving towards rock and roll. By the middle of the 1950s, vocal groups were forming across the United States. New York became one of the busiest centers, especially Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Los Angeles also developed strong local scenes. The Moonglows became known for carefully arranged harmony and expressive lead singing. Their recording sincerely became one of the great romantic ballads of the era. The Five Satins created another lasting favorite with In the Still of the Night. The song was recorded in the basement of a church in Connecticut. Its gentle opening and repeated background pattern gave it the feeling of a private late-night promise. The Flamingos brought elegance and atmosphere to vocal group music. Their version of I Only Have Eyes for You surrounded the lead voice with rich, floating harmony. It sounded intimate and dreamlike at the same time. Other groups represented the more energetic side of the style. The Cadillacs combined strong singing with lively stage movement. Speedo became one of their best-known records. The Spaniels recorded Good Night, Sweetheart, Good Night, a song that became closely connected with the sound of the decade. The Heartbeats, led by James Shepherd, released 1,000 Miles Away. Years later, Shepherd's new group, Shep and the Limolites, recorded Daddy's Home as a continuation of the story. Listeners enjoyed these connections. A successful record could inspire a sequel, an answer song, or a reply told from another person's point of view. By the late 1950s, doo-wop had moved far beyond local rehearsal spaces. The voices that once echoed through stairwells and railway stations were now heard on radios and jukeboxes across America. The music had become part of teenage culture, and its most famous years were about to begin. The golden age of doo-wop produced some of the most recognizable voices in early rock and roll. One of the youngest stars was Frankie Lymon. He became the lead singer of the Teenagers, a New York group whose members included Black and Puerto Rican singers. Their breakthrough record, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, appeared in 1956. Lymon was only 13 years old. His voice was high, clear, and unmistakably youthful. The group answered him with quick, energetic phrases, and the rhythm gave the record a sense of excitement. Teenagers were hearing someone close to their own age sing about the confusion of love. Success arrived quickly, but it did not last. Lymon was separated from the group and promoted as a solo act. His later records failed to match the success of the Teenagers. He also struggled with drug addiction and died in 1968 at the age of 25. His short life became one of the saddest stories in early rock and roll and a warning about the risks faced by very young performers in the music business. The Platters followed a different path. They created a smoother and more polished form of vocal harmony. Guided by manager and songwriter Buck Ram, they recorded songs designed to succeed on both the rhythm and blues and mainstream pop charts. Tony Williams possessed a powerful lead voice that could rise dramatically above the group. Only You, The Great Pretender, My Prayer, and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes became enormous successes. The Platters were not a street corner group in exactly the same way as some other acts, but they shared the central doo-wop idea of a strong lead voice surrounded by carefully arranged harmony. Their success showed that Black vocal group music could reach audiences around the world. The Del-Vikings offered another unusual story. Several members met while serving in the United States Air Force near Pittsburgh. The group included both Black and white singers, which was uncommon in an era when much of American life remained segregated. Come Go With Me became a major hit in 1957. The record opened with a memorable vocal pattern before moving into a lively lead performance supported by deep bass and bright harmony. Whispering Bells gave the group another lasting success. Military transfers, confusing contracts, and disputes over the name eventually created competing versions of the Del-Vikings. Even so, their best recordings remain joyful examples of 1950s vocal harmony. Doo-Wop was rooted mainly in African-American communities, but spread through many city neighborhoods. Italian-American and Puerto Rican teenagers formed groups and developed their own versions of the sound. In the Bronx, Dion became the lead singer of the Belmonts. Dion and the Belmonts recorded I Wonder Why, No One Knows, and A Teenager in Love. Their records mixed street corner harmony with pop songwriting. Dion later left the group and became a successful solo artist with Runaround Sue and The Wanderer. Female singers were also essential to the story. The Chantels, led by Arlene Smith, recorded Maybe in 1957. Smith sounded powerful and vulnerable at the same time. The surrounding voices created a soft, emotional setting around her lead. The record became an important influence on the girl group sound of the early 1960s. The Bobettes found success with Mr. Lee, while the Hearts recorded Lonely Nights. Groups such as the Shirelles, the Marvelettes, the Crystals, and the Ronettes later carried many doo-wop ideas into a new era. Their recordings used larger arrangements and stronger studio production, but the basic structure remained familiar. One singer delivered the story, and the group answered her. The changing history of the Drifters shows how doo-wop developed into soul music. The first important version of the group was formed around Clyde McPhatter after he left Billy Ward and the Dominoes. McPhatter brought the emotional force of gospel singing into popular music. Money Honey became one of the early Drifters' best-known recordings. Over time, the membership changed almost completely. A later version featuring Ben E. King recorded There Goes My Baby, This Magic Moment, and Save the Last Dance for Me. These songs used strings, fuller instrumentation, and more advanced studio production. They sounded different from the simpler records of the early 1950s, yet the central relationship remained the same. A powerful lead voice was surrounded by supporting singers who answered, encouraged, and strengthened the emotion. The Drifters proved that doo-wop did not simply disappear. It developed into something new. Not every record was serious or romantic. The Coasters became famous for fast, humorous songs that felt like short comic plays. Working with writers and producers Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, they recorded Yakety Yak, Charlie Brown, Sear Chin, and Poison Ivy. Different members played vocal characters, argued with one another, and delivered punchlines. Danny and the Juniors celebrated teenage dancing with At the Hop. The Diamonds found success with Little Darlin', using an exaggerated bass voice and a dramatic spoken passage. In 1961, the Marcells turned the old standard Blue Moon into a fast vocal group performance. Its deep opening pattern became instantly recognizable. These records showed that doo-wop could make people laugh and dance as easily as it could express heartbreak. But the world around the music was often far less joyful. Black performers could have a hit record and still be refused a room in a hotel. Touring musicians sometimes slept in cars or stayed with local families because nearby accommodation would not accept them. They could be welcomed on stage by a white audience and treated as unwanted visitors once the show ended. White performers sometimes recorded versions of songs first made successful by black artists. Those new versions often received more radio play, wider distribution, and larger advertising budgets. The original singers might hear someone else's version of their song, becoming a national hit. Financial exploitation was also common. Young performers signed contracts they did not understand. Some received a small fee and never saw royalties. Others lost the publishing rights to songs they had written. Managers or record companies sometimes claimed ownership of a group name. When singers left, replacements could continue appearing under the same name. The harmony sounded joyful, but the business behind it was often deeply unfair. Even the name doo-wop arrived later than many people realize. During the music's most successful years, performers usually describe what they did as rhythm and blues, rock and roll, or group harmony. The later label came from the repeated syllables heard behind many lead singers. Collectors and radio presenters adopted it because they needed a simple term for a wide range of vocal group records. Some performers accepted the name. Others felt that it reduced a rich musical tradition to a few nonsense sounds. Both reactions are understandable. The syllables were memorable, but the music involved much more than that. It drew on gospel, blues, jazz, close harmony, rhythm, storytelling, and neighborhood culture. Behind the famous records were friendships, rivalries, military service, broken contracts, and long journeys between poorly organized concerts. Some groups lasted only a few months. Others continued for decades with changing members. By the beginning of the 1960s, American popular music was moving in several new directions. The girl group sound became more elaborate. Motown developed a polished form of soul music built around strong rhythm sections, memorable songs, and carefully arranged voices. Solo performers also became increasingly important. Then, in 1964, the Beatles and other British groups transformed the pop market. Audiences became interested in bands whose members sang, wrote songs, and played their own instruments. Traditional vocal groups found it harder to reach the charts. The image of several friends gathered around one microphone began to seem old-fashioned beside electric guitars, larger studio productions, and the rapidly changing sounds of the new decade. But doo-wop did not truly end. Its most important ideas had already entered other kinds of music. The Temptations, the Four Tops, the Miracles, and many other Motown acts used lead-in background arrangements that had developed through earlier rhythm and blues groups. Soul music inherited gospel emotion and call and response. The Beach Boys built elaborate harmonies influenced partly by the vocal groups of the previous decade. The Beatles admired American rhythm and blues and recorded songs connected with that tradition. Doo-wop moved away from the center of popular music, but its influence remained everywhere. During the late 1960s and 1970s, audiences began to look back at early rock and roll with affection. Oldies radio returned forgotten records to the air. Collectors searched shops and markets for rare singles released by small independent labels. Songs that had attracted little attention when new could become valuable years later. Former members of vocal groups began appearing at revival concerts. For some performers, these shows offered a second chance to receive recognition that had been denied to them in their youth. The film American Graffiti, released in 1973, used early rock and roll and doo-wop to recreate the atmosphere of teenage America in the early 1960s. Sha Na Na turned nostalgia into a stage show filled with harmony, dancing, and humor. Their appearance at Woodstock in 1969 showed that interest in the music returned surprisingly quickly. Later artists continued to celebrate the style. Manhattan Transfer recorded The Boy from New York City. Billy Joel created a modern vocal harmony tribute with The Longest Time. The film Back to the Future introduced Earth Angel to a new generation of cinema audiences. These revivals often presented a romantic world of diners, dances, jukeboxes, and summer nights. That image helped preserve the music, although it sometimes hid the segregation, poverty, and unfair contracts experienced by the original performers. The lasting power of doo-wop comes from something very simple. A human voice begins a song, and other voices gather around it. The lead may sound lonely, but the group makes sure the singer is never completely alone. They answer the questions, repeat the promises, and carry the rhythm. A private feeling becomes a shared performance. Many early records were technically imperfect. They were sometimes made quickly using basic equipment. One voice might sound louder than another, or the instruments might appear distant. Yet those qualities can make the recordings feel alive. Listeners can hear young people discovering their ability to create something memorable. Doo-wop also proves that music does not always require wealth or complicated technology. Four friends in a stairwell could build a complete arrangement. The bass voice supplied the foundation. The tenor carried the melody. The remaining singers shaped the harmony around them. An ordinary hallway became a rehearsal studio, and a street corner became a stage. The influence continues whenever a group answers a lead singer. It can be heard when background voices repeat a hook, when a bass vocal begins a song, or when several singers turn one simple melody into a rich harmony. The golden era itself lasted only a relatively short time, but its musical language became part of rock and roll, soul, pop, and modern rhythm and blues. Doo-wop began within African American musical culture and grew in the changing neighborhoods of American cities. It drew from gospel, blues, jazz, and rhythm and blues. Teenagers shaped it through friendship, competition, and imagination. Small labels placed the music on inexpensive records, and radio carried it far beyond the streets where it began. Some performers became famous. Many were exploited. Few could have expected their voices to remain familiar more than half a century later. The music transformed simple emotions into unforgettable harmony. A promise became a melody. A heartbeat became a bass line. A group of friends became an orchestra. The streets are different now, and many of the original singers are gone. The studios have changed. The jukeboxes are quieter. But when one of those records begins to play, the years seem to fall away. The voices gather once again. The bass singer begins the rhythm. The lead takes a breath. And the story of doo-wop starts all over again. You have been listening to the story of doo-wop, presented by Doo-Wop and Blues, where the harmonies of yesterday continue to live today.